This is pretty crazy to say, or maybe not that crazy at all, that one, Uber and Lyft drivers are making less money than before, but two, Uber and Lyft drivers, based on some new statistics and research, are making less money than taxi drivers. This is an article by the New York Times, and as you can see right away, Uber and Lyft drivers now earn less in fares and tips than taxi drivers, according to new data from the Taxi and Limousine Commission, aka the TLC, which regulates both groups. I will say this is in New York, so this is not a completely countrywide thing. Remember, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. And as you can imagine, I feel like taxi drivers in New York City, definitely a lot more of a lucrative option compared to, like, say, being a taxi driver in some remote part of Ohio, even here in LA, for example. I feel like taxis are a big staple of New York. So remember, this is fairly direct and specific to New York, but I gotta be honest, like I've mentioned in other videos, this could be more of a nationwide thing. I can see a lot of other cities having this kind of data come out as well. You know, they kind of gave us some statistics here, but let's go down a little bit. This has been a big thing in New York, in case you didn't know, that drivers have increasingly battled with Uber, and this is a big thing, Uber sued the Taxi Commission to block a raise for Uber and Lyft drivers in December of 2022. So there's supposed to be a raise for rideshare drivers, and Uber was like, no. This has been a huge ongoing issue for New York drivers. Of course, all my New York drivers know what I'm talking about. You know, Uber is kind of ridiculous. Uber argued the raise could cost the company an additional $21 million to $23 million per month. Okay, but I mean, so that's kind of ridiculous to me, saying, oh, well, we're going to lose money because we're not paying our drivers enough is kind of a ridiculous argument. And then it would force to raise its passenger fares by 10%. Yes, 10% is 10%, but that means, like, say, if I'm taking a $20 Uber, if you just look at the math, if I pulled up Uber and said $20, I'm like, all right. And then, like, say, I pulled it up, and, like, say this happened, and that means it'd be $22. I mean, I don't know what what's it called? The JND, I remember learning that in psychology, or the just noticeable difference. I don't think the JND from an accounting perspective would be as low as 10% for the average person to be like, oh, whoa, $2 more or 10% more? No way, I'm not taking this Uber, or I'm not taking this Lyft. I don't know. But it's been a huge issue. You know, I mean, drivers organize strikes. This has been an ongoing thing. Unfortunately, though, and this is kind of bad news, Uber still prevailed in its lawsuit after a state court judge said the city had failed to sufficiently justify the increase for rideshare drivers. So I guess, I don't know if they didn't have a good argument. Again, it's kind of tough to say, you know, behind the wall, so to speak. But the ruling will also apply to drivers for Lyft, which was not part of the lawsuit. But remember, Uber and Lyft kind of goes hand in hand. And, you know, they're trying to boast about Uber here. You know, Josh Gold, the spokesman for Uber, so that its drivers remain busy by any metric, which is true. I'll give Uber that. It's very easy now to get an Uber ride. I remember when I first started driving, it wasn't uncommon for you to turn on the app and wait 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get your first ride. Like, I do kind of remember that. Now, definitely not the case. You turn on the app and you get stuff instantly. In addition, Uber kind of revealed this now, this is like a few years ago, an overlapping feature where before you finish a ride, you already accept another ride, good to go. I remember it wasn't like that. It was a very almost binary thing. You're in a ride, you drop them off, you hit a button. You wait, sometimes it's a minute, sometimes 5 minutes. You then turn it back on again and continue, blah, blah, blah. Now, of course, they overlap, so things are a lot quicker. But it's still, I think, an issue not about the amount of rides you get. It's about the amount of money you get. And looking here, you know, they say that the earnings have increased significantly in recent years. There's a big asterisk on that, though. Uber drivers now earn an average of $33.30 per hour before tips. Keep in mind, this is in New York City, up from $23.50 per hour in 2018. So yes, that is a pretty big hike. That in the past, I was about to say 5 years. It's 2023 now. In the past 5 years, it's gone up an average of $10 extra per hour. But, and this is where the big but comes in, but the inflation rate, as of last fall, triple what it was 4 years ago, has possibly canceled out some of these wage increases. You know, this is a big thing. The cost of food in the city was up by 9% over the previous year, and drivers and passengers are both dealing with more expensive Uber rides. As of September, for example, prices have risen 37% over the last 3 years, according to the data company, the data analytics company, Yipit Data, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I mean, this is a big issue. I mean, look at eggs. What is that? The average is $33 you're making an hour. That's like what? Like a half a carton of eggs right now, which is, I was at the store recently. I mean, everyone's been talking about this, how eggs are just out of control. I mean, things are more expensive now. I mean, it kind of stinks to say inflation's a massive issue. And yeah, you're making an average of $10 more per hour, but when you factor in inflation, gas costs, etc., are you really making more money, or are you just making more money per hour, which is true, ignoring any of these other things in terms of inflation, the accounting, taxes, maintenance on your car, gas, etc., etc. And going here, many drivers said the higher fares had benefited Uber more than them. Again, not surprising to anybody. All the drivers I know talk about this. It's a big issue that, we're like, wait, so they're making more because they're charging passengers more, but I'm making less. Like, something doesn't add up. This is one quote from somebody. Don't think what they charge you is what goes into the driver's pocket. There's a bunch of people talking about this, how it's just an issue. The app services make money by charging passengers as much as they can and paying drivers as little as possible. Capitalism in its finest, and what stinks is it used to not be like this. I feel like it was a pretty, I remember, and I said this before in a recent video, I never really remembered when I first started driving anyone complaining about Uber and Lyft not paying that much. Every driver was stoked. They're like, wait, I can drive whenever I want, I'm making good money, blah, 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 and now it's definitely not the issue, As Bruce said, the point of the business is to squeeze both the driver and the passenger as much as possible because the companies make more money. Not surprising. And remember, the companies favor the driver more than the passenger. So let's say if you dispute something, if there's an argument, I talked about this recently in a video as well. If, let's say, there's a weird stipulation, the company could just say, oh, you know what, just deactivate that driver, we'll get another driver. So from their perspective, from both Uber and Lyft, hate to say it, I think Uber's worse when it comes to this, but deactivating drivers for no reason and just looking at them as disposable, pretty big thing. And then Uber, which arrived in New York in 2011, was seen by many drivers as a better alternative to the yellow cabs that along rural city streets. They offered bonuses and all that kind of stuff, especially if you want to switch. I need some water for this because it's a lot going on. I think the hard part with this too, like looking at this whole article, which there's a lot of statistics and everything in this, which is what I like, is even though this is in New York, which is one of the biggest ride-sharing spots arguably in the world right now, it's not just New York. There's a lot going on, and again, this has a huge ripple effect everywhere else in the country because this is not going to be that different, I feel like, to a lot of other places. The taxi industry plummeted, as I've mentioned before in other videos. It's kind of sad. It is kind of tricky, though. I'm going to be honest, where it's like a lot of people, and I remember this in Boston, complain about the taxi industry. I remember waiting 2 to 3 hours sometimes after a bar to get a taxi just to pay an overpriced ride, and I have to, tell them where I'm going. I remember the last time I took a taxi in Boston, the driver had to ask me for directions of how to get home, and they took the wrong route, which in Boston adds another 10 minutes onto your route. I still had to pay the extra fare because he went the wrong way. We all remember getting into taxis too before Uber and Lyft, where it's, especially for, say, some people watching this who never, rode a taxi, you have to rely on a taxi. You get into a taxi, especially, say, if you didn't live in that city, and be like, oh, I just know they're going to take me the scenic route. It's kind of crazy to think that back in the day, that was just the thing. You kind of assumed the taxi driver would purposely take you on this long, circuitous route to charge more money for you. When Uber and Lyft came out, one huge underrated aspect is you can look on the GPS, look on the map, and say, oh, I know they know exactly where they're going, and they're not trying to take the long way to get more money out of me, right? But that was a thing a lot of taxi drivers did, kind of things to say. And obviously it is kind of sad, but looking at here, this is just one example for somebody. They're driving for Uber here in about $1,200 per week last year, but that dipped below $1,000 in December, or less than 1/3 of the $3,000 a week that he was making driving a cab in 2015. There are a lot of people as well driving, and I think that's a big thing, especially in New York. I have heard they've been kind of putting some caps on the amount of people that can sign up, because remember, you also need special licenses. I actually just did a video about, the rules, or the requirements to be a Lyft driver in New York. Going here, the total number of for-hire vehicles, most of which are affiliated with Uber and Lyft, also shrank from 125K to 100K during the same period. there weren't enough trips for everyone at the height of the pandemic, and obviously that does make sense. So drivers had to switch to other industries to make a living. This resulted obviously in a major reduction in the numbers of drivers and vehicles. However, though, and this is a big thing, even though that makes sense, the pandemic was a very unique example when it comes to ride sharing. Some critics said the number for hire drivers, it's still too high, making it difficult for anyone to make a decent living. Too many drivers on the street, or in this case, too many cars on the street is like too many cooks in the kitchen. Everybody bumps into each other. And so this is just a huge thing, there's a giant mess. And it's kind of interesting how I feel like things have come full circle where taxi drivers are now being respected more and getting more credit, so to speak, and help than rideshare drivers. Going down here, meter taxi fares increased for the first time in a decade. The minimum pay standard has really changed the industry. Drivers are making more across the board. And then going up here, they established a bill to have minimum pay standards for app service drivers. This is a big thing. This kind of happened as well here in California with Prop 22. Since then, the taxi commission has significantly raised wages for Uber and Lyft drivers. Now, this is huge, right? Of course, that's big. And it is helping out drivers, but it still seems like that they're favoring more taxi drivers with everything kind of going on. And it makes sense because, like I said, it's probably the fact that with Uber's been trying to halt and stop drivers getting paid more money in New York, which is obviously super messed up. The taxi situation isn't trying to do that, so to speak, right? And then going down here, again, these are different accounts of people talking about how, they used to make more money. They said that, going down here, Uber and Lyft drivers have earned less than taxi drivers because they work significantly fewer hours each month. That could be very true. And calculating by the hour, they make slightly more according to city data. So there is this kind of given way in this, and I will talk about this at the end of this kind of article. But there is a lot to this, right? As you can see here, taxi drivers worked an average of 7.6 hours per day compared to 6.5 hours per day for Uber and Lyft drivers. In addition, last year, Uber reduced its average service fee to 16% of the total passenger fare for every trip that started in New York City, compared to the generally between 20 and 28% before 2015. So there's a lot going on here, as you can see. Some drivers feeling trapped because they invested heavily in Uber and Lyft when they thought driving for ride, hailing service would be a lucrative career, but then they realized, oh shoot, maybe Uber and Lyft isn't really that good. Who's this? Alpha Berry said that she bought a 2017 Lexus for about $42K, which I'm not gonna lie is a bold move when he decided to work for Lyft. But then at this point now, he said he cannot return to the taxi industry because he spent all this money on this car. There's just a lot of tricky things going on. Overall, I'm not gonna lie. One, it's a big mess, right? As you can see from the article, a lot of different points. I did kind of jump around a lot. It's a very lengthy article, but I did want to kind of give you the highlights. And I think one, I do kind of feel, and this has been happening a lot more, that Uber and Lyft drivers are now being treated worse than taxi drivers. It could be maybe the fact that Uber and Lyft is not wanting to spend as much money to give to their drivers, and they want to hold on to more money, which, as you saw, especially with the lawsuit and everything going on, that's kind of what's going on. But I think the other thing is there's a lot of other numbers that come into play. This one makes, I think, ride sharing and how much you make so tricky. On one end, as I showed you in the beginning of the article, they said Uber and Lyft drivers are definitely making less than taxi drivers. However, near the end, I showed you a different perspective, saying, well, if you look at how much each person drives, maybe Uber and Lyft drivers make more per hour. If you look at the average hours that someone drives, of course, if you drive more hours, you're going to make more money than, let's say, someone who doesn't drive as many hours. That's just pure math, obviously based off how much you make per hour. So there are just so many tricky things into place. And I think at the end of the day, especially as well, I might as well say this too, with how many drivers there are driving in New York. As I said, having too many drivers on the road is like having too many cooks in the kitchen. It's just a very multifaceted issue. And that's one thing I talked about in my whole 5 concerns I have for Uber and Lyft in 2023 video. This is a big thing, that with the congestion of drivers, with the pay not being good, yes, the hourly rate has gone up, but has it really gone up to match the depreciation on your car, the maintenance, the wear and tear, gas prices, food prices, inflation? That is tough to say. It's just a lot going on with Uber and Lyft drivers, and a lot of drivers just overall, especially if you look at a lot of statistics and numbers, a lot of drivers just aren't happy. About half the comments, or I might even say more than half the comments on this channel, maybe between 60 and 75%, depending on the week, are usually negative about Lyft and Uber, saying, I don't like Lyft and Uber. They make their drivers slaves. They take advantage of drivers. They look at drivers as disposable. And it's not been getting any better. It's been getting worse. And this is kind of a prime example of that a lot of drivers are like, wait, so it seems like they're caring about taxis more, and I might be able to make more money as a taxi driver. Why am I still doing Uber and Lyft when I can just take a taxi? In addition, I mentioned this before in other videos, that there were times here in LA that I was trying to get an Uber or Lyft. Not only could I not get one, but even if I did find one, the rates were just outrageous. I talked to a taxi driver that was just kind of like on the road chilling, just kind of waiting for a ride, walked up, got a good rate, got in the taxi, and went home. It was that simple and that easy. And of course, I think that having Uber and Lyft and taxis has a kind of a very unique yin and yang, and sometimes it leads more towards taxis, which in the beginning, it was only taxis. Then it more moved towards Ubers and Lyfts. And now I feel like it's kind of 50-50. If anything, taxi drivers might have a bigger edge, especially now a lot of passengers who take Ubers and Lyfts are saying, I just spent so much money on this ride. It used to be this amount, and now it's this amount. And it is tough to say, too, bringing this kind of unique thing into question. I remember back in the day, when I'd go from, let's say, the Valley here in Los Angeles to Hollywood, West Hollywood. So let's say Reseda to West Hollywood. That could be, with traffic, 45-plus minute drive. And I remember I would probably do it as an Uber pool or whatever, but I remember I could spend $12 sometimes, which is kind of an average, to go 45 minutes. And yes, it was a shared ride, but $12 is ridiculous. Now, that same ride is probably double and a half. Is it that prices have gone up for passengers because Uber and Lyft is charging more, or are they charging too little before? And it could be a blend of the two. Honestly, it is tough to say. And I think that's why there's just so much going on with Uber and Lyft right now that makes the waters very rocky. And yes, this is only in New York City, but I know this is a huge issue everywhere else. I mentioned before, like with Prop 22 here in California, AB5 passed saying, okay, independent contractors, you have to be employees essentially for a lot of businesses and companies and organizations. Then Prop 22 said, you know what? Ride-sharing, though, is a unique example where they're going to say it's independent contractors. Now there's talk of appealing Prop 22 and kind of reverting it to say, hey, no, it actually does fall under AB5. As being employees, drivers have to be employees. The independent contractor versus employee debate is going to be massive here in 2023. But I feel like 2023, and I have to be honest, and again, when I talk about these, when I talk about this in some of my videos, I want to stress, I'm not trying to create like clickbait, and I'm not trying to create any kind of like irregular hype, or what is that word? I can't remember what it's called, but fear, doubt, a foldal, I don't know. So a term used in investing, but like, I'm not trying to create any fear or skepticism or like weird conspiracy hype, so to speak. But I do think, looking at all the data, I feel like 2023 is going to be a very unique year. I'm predicting this, a very unique year for ride sharing, to see what happens with independent contractors, the employee status. Is there going to be some more tricky stuff with the payment as well? As as I explained in New York City, there was a strike from Uber drivers because of what Uber is doing. So there's a lot of messy waters going on right now. And again, I'm just predicting it. I don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully it is a very chill year, so to speak. But I feel like 2023, just overall, might be one of the most unique years for ride sharing besides the beginning. And it's only January. We have a long way to go and a lot of time to see what will happen for the rest of this year.